Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Deconstructors Club. We're so glad that you can join us. We have an outstanding episode today. I'm your host, Alex Weiss, co-host Bob Azarito here with us. And we have a great guest. She's a friend of mine, known her for years, done work together. She's going to talk about what she does and how impactful that's been within our city here in Sacramento and beyond. So I know, Bob, you have any
Well, we
words?
processed last week the election a little bit, did our best to say what we felt and what we were thinking, and we said everything we know.
Yeah.
So we needed to bring in someone to help us a little bit to understand what is going on.
We were a bit kind of all over the place, but it didn't sound like that. I heard it again and I was like, well, it didn't sound that bad.
We were trying to give just sort of immediate reaction to the thing. So I remember I asked you at the beginning, how did you feel, remember?
Right.
The morning of Wednesday morning after the election.
Yeah.
How did you feel and what were you thinking in that moment? I thought maybe we could start with Gabby to ask her that same question.
Well, our special guest that's with us, Gabby Trejo, you're the executive director of Area Congregations, Sacramento Area Congregations, SAC-ACT, Sacramento Area Congregations Together. There you go. So, so glad you're with us, Gabby.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So first of all, before we go into that conversation, tell us a little bit about what you do here in Sacramento and what you're a part of. I know the greater organization nationally too.
Yeah, so thank you for having me today. Gabby Trejo, I'm the executive director for Sacramento ACT. We're a local nonprofit that does faith-based organizing. It is our role to develop leaders in our community, people of faith and in good faith that want to change the world. And part of our role is to help people not just identify problems in our society, but actually identify solutions and be part of like thinking with the collective we on like, how do we address social issues impacting our families? And so we're a multi-faith org, and we've been in our region for over 30 years. We're part of Pico, California, and Faith in Action National. So we have sister organizations throughout the country and actually internationally too, in Rwanda, in El Salvador. And so people who are just changing lives and changing their own families' trajectories. So
yeah, I remember years ago as a pastor leading a fairly large Hispanic congregation. We had a good number of undocumented members there. And I felt so alone on what do I do? How do I do? You know, because I seen the situation. And that was a big part of my deconstructing too, because serving people that definitely were in a system of injustice and what was happening. And I couldn't find answers. And I was like, where do I start? What do I do? And I remember hearing about SAC-ACT, talking to folks about it and thinking faith-based organizing. This is amazing. This is something that I think we can be a part of and we can get involved in and feel a part of a greater cause also for immigration reform that we're still talking about
40 years later.
Yes.
We're still in the desert.
Yeah. It's amazing, but at least we're not doing it alone. You know, we're doing this work together, and SAC-ACT has been an amazing organization to work with other faith-based organizations too, partner organizations, and in the same way with other clergy members. And, you know, the friendship, the camaraderie, all of that we were able to develop, especially in these hard times, we're going to need it. So
we're definitely going to need it. And actually faith-based organizing was part of my deconstructing as a person. I always tell folks that faith-based organizing brought me back to the church in ways that I never would have imagined. Because I guess before I thought like, oh yeah, you know, I was raised Catholic. Yeah, I could do this thing. But the reality is that faith-based organizing helped me see God in people and kind of like live it in a very real way. Like not just like, okay, I'm praying at night and hoping that God answers my prayers, but that actually God is asking me to also listen to people in my community and what are their prayers and hopes for their families. And how do I use my gifts that I've been given by God to help people find their own gifts too, right?
And, you know, it's interesting because on the opposite side of, you know, being a big part of the evangelical world, it's all about spirituality, faith, worship, all of that. Yet I felt like I was useless. I felt like I wasn't doing much. There was not, the impact wasn't happening. even though because you get so involved in your church bubble, in your religious, context, but to the point where you don't feel like you're really relating to the needs of the communities around you and the world around you. So what was a big part of my deconstruction was when I started understanding with faith-based organizing and what that means and how to really step out of this religious bubble and put your faith into action, real action. And it's interesting because when I started doing that, then I started becoming a threat to the bubble I was a part of.
Yeah.
Then they started looking at me like, what are you doing? You're becoming a socialist or you're becoming a communist, or just because you have compassion and love for people and wanting to serve people that are in need.
Well, and a big part of my early years in evangelicalism was that you weren't supposed to try to change the world. That the very part of your theology was, that's not your job. The world's going to get worse and worse and worse, and all you needed to do is to figure out how to get people into heaven. You weren't supposed to try to. In fact, you can still hear older evangelicals talk that way.
Because it's true. It's rescuing people out of go to heaven, not to change the world.
The world's going to get worse and worse. Accept it. It's just the way it is. Now, of course, that's changed a bit. Now it's about using our power to force people into certain ways of thinking. But early on, there was this almost disengagement with the world, and I think for many people that was part of their deconstruction, to realize, wait a minute, you mean I'm here not to make a difference, not to try to help, and that became a little bit of a disconnect with what they were learning in their evangelicalism. Right. Yeah.
Well, we do have a question for you, Gabby, because we were talking about this in our last episode, kind of going over how we felt about the elections and what this really means now, especially in the work that you're doing. So I don't know how you're going to be able to start this whole conversation, but we would love for you to hear from you, to know how you were feeling when it happened, and basically how did this happen, especially when it comes to the Latino vote.
And were you surprised?
Yeah.
I mean, there were a lot of people in the election who felt like Kamala was doing well and she ran a great campaign and she was very convincing to so many people, but obviously in the end, not enough people. So I'm just kind of wondering, did you and your people you surrounding yourself with, were they surprised? Did they, and then what was it like when you've heard the news, I guess?
Oh my God, where do I start? The reality is that I must say that I see the world as an immigrant Catholic woman. I can't see the world other than that. I came to this country when I was 10 years old, and when I was 12 years old, California passed Prop 187. Mm-hmm. So that is like a big part of my formative. Immigration is a thing. The impact of immigration is something that impacts my family directly. Like I have still loved ones who are undocumented, have been for 20 plus years.
Can you give a little description on what Prop 187
Prop 187 in the early 90s tried to, California's passed it, right? That said that if you were undocumented, you should not have access to very basic resources like public education, that you shouldn't be tended at hospitals. Mm-hmm. And so it really dehumanized immigrants in California. And it actually did have, even though Californians voted and passed this prop, it got removed. Mm-hmm. And we saw California shift. I was a 12-year-old girl then, but I saw the uproar of immigrants across California saying, wait a minute, what does this mean for my families? And so Californians that started organizing, and young people that were 12 years old like me at the time, by like the next 5 to 6 years started becoming able to vote, which changed the landscape in California. And then I think it has had a big impact on the way that Latinos in California have navigated politics. And so for me, I always go back to that moment. I was surprised when I saw the election results, even though I know a lot of people that are like, oh, I wasn't surprised. I was more surprised the first time. Our organization at ACT, we are nonpartisan, so we don't do any work around that. Like we believe in the democratic process, right? Whatever voters believe in, like we're gonna honor it and support it. but it's going to have an impact on the work we do, because it is our role to identify problems and solutions. And clearly there's problems that are going to be created and amplified in our communities. And we are thinking about what are those solutions, and we can get to that in a little bit. But I was very surprised and I was very heartbroken. I have dedicated myself to community organizing because I deeply, deeply believe in people. Like, I love people. I really don't care what people's political parties. I really don't. So the first time that he won, I told myself, well, people don't know better. Like, I was like, they just don't know that he's really going to do these things that he's saying he's going to do. But this time, the heartbreak was that I could no longer excuse people that they didn't know.
Right.
Like, you actually know. And one of the things as a woman of faith has been really agitating is that it's not about the candidate itself, right? Because people come and go, but that people of faith have used reasoning, or have reason electing a person that has publicly spoken ill of very many different communities, that has talked about hate and division. Someone that has been charged and convicted of crimes, someone that has been of crimes that are both financial, monetary, and crimes that are sexual. I think that is actually a big, it poses a bigger question about who do we need to become together? You know, I don't know the answer necessarily right now, but that was heartbreaking for me, because it was about like, oh, wow. Folks are saying the economy, folks in my own family, you know, I mean, I have family in Texas.
Me too.
That said, well, the economy is going to be better, right? And if I really think deeper, was this really about the economy? Like, do you think that, because if my sibling is not able to, is saying, you know, the economy is going to get better, but I know that the people that I'm hearing that from are people that can still purchase the high cost of living, even though they don't like it, they don't want to pay the groceries, but they have the funds to pay those things. I work with folks that really are struggling and drowning, and they probably would still be drowning financially, no matter who won. But the fact that the person that won continues to divide our country, I think that's the scariest part for me.
Yeah, and now it's being confirmed that his plans, he's going to initiate them. I think for a lot of people, because he speaks so over the top, so extreme, the idea is, well, he's not really going to do that. He's not really, you know. And I think we're beginning to recognize, why did you doubt that he wouldn't try at least to do these things? But the referendum against the Democrats was huge in this election. It wasn't just the president of the United States. It was also congressional seats. And so it makes it much more alarming for us. And so we've been struggling last podcast to what wasn't I seeing? What were people thinking? And so that's really, it's just part of the processing. I know we eventually have to get to, okay, what do we do now? But I think that other stirring of what happened, what's going on in our country that I didn't see.
And you said something that really stood out for me, is the fact that people know now. In 2016, I was hearing the same rhetoric. Well, he just talks like that because it's politics and he just wants to get elected. But when it happens, actually, it's not going to be that way. And I heard that specific line from someone, a prominent leader that we were talking about earlier before we started recording. That specific person said those words in a meeting that I was in. He specifically said that that's just a part of the political process. They just have to do that to get elected. But you know what? It's not going to be that way. That was a lie. No. Because going into, and I know you know about that, 2017, we went through some things. I lost a family, families in my congregation to deportation. one of them gave me a phone call and said, I need help right now because down my block, ICE is deporting 2 families. And we don't know what to do and how, and that's when you're looking at sanctuaries and, how do we get them out of there? And so something for real, this was happening. Top of that, you remember Mother's Day, 2017 at my church, ICE comes to the parking lot to terrorize our congregation. These are for real things. And so I remember all those, like if it was yesterday. Yeah. And to think that this is going to happen again. And not only that, even later on, because I really got involved to see how I can help, we literally saw families being separated in front of our eyes. In one of the courtrooms, we were there to be a presence to undocumenteds that were being processed. And there was a family there that was being separated right in front of our eyes. It was the most horrific thing you could ever see. Yeah. And I think that in that process, it was through SAC ACT that you all had sent several of us out there, and we actually saw these things happening, which was something very, very moving. And I get emotional because I know that some of that is going to come right. All of those feelings are going to come right back because this is something that I believe is going to happen because it's happened before. It will happen again. And this time, I don't know how much more it's going to be because back then, at least, there was some folks in his cabinet that were kind of holding things back here, being filters. This is a different story now.
Yeah, I think when I think about the majority of America made a decision. And I don't agree with that decision. I would have chosen differently. I chose differently. But that's the world that we're going to have to live in. And some people are not ready to move into the what do we have to do. But I think there is also an invitation of like, okay, as we figure out how do we protect families, how do we protect, the rights of people that have been fought for so many years, there's also an invitation to think about like, how do we, as just people of good faith that want to see a better world, sit in the tension and the uncomfortableness, which is hard, across the table from someone who sees the world or their politics different to say, help me understand. Help me understand where you're coming from. And I heard this quote that I think speaks to the space we got to create or an invitation for us. And it's from Valerie Kaur, I might be mispronouncing it, but it says, what if the darkness is not the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb? What if our America is not dead, but a country still awaiting to be born? What if the story of America is one of long labor? This is from Valerie Kaur, Kaur. And when I read this quote, it forces me to say amongst chaos, we have an opportunity to actually give birth to something different. Mm-hmm. To be able to say, Thanksgiving is going to be hard for many families in America. We know that. But I want to invite our folks to have curiosity over judgment. Because there's many people that didn't feel heard and people that are hurting financially, right? In the fact that they were organized with such language that was divisive, it's a bigger problem than the economy. It really is. And if we show up with our own loved ones and families holding that judgment, you can still judge, but at least invite curiosity. Help me understand why this person calls to you. Then I think we're gonna start learning things about how we're relating to each other as a human race, right? And then because at the end of the day, we're gonna have to live with the consequences of whatever policies are put in place.
Right.
And I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna say that impact those that voted for.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about some of the different people groups in our country that were surprising to us. And, the Latino group was one of the surprises to me and in our conversation. We tried to think of possible reasons for that. And I just wonder if in your short time, 2 weeks worth of exploring your own brain and experience, what do you think about our immigrant populations and what would cause them to view Donald Trump as a safe bet, as a good bet for their lives, for their families, for their relatives and loved ones? Can you help shed some light on that? I mean, we talked about it. I'm not sure how much light we shed, but we sure did ask the questions. And I just thought that maybe it's something I would like to hear you talk about.
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I know we're going to do another podcast on this piece, just on this piece, because
yes, ma'am, you're coming back. We're gonna do it.
I think there's a couple different things. Anybody's guess, I think, will be probably good one, because I don't think there's one reason for it. But as I look at my own family, right? And we look at the history of Latinos, and our proximity to the border can also have an impact, right? Because if out of sight, out of mind, right? In Spanish, we have the saying, ojos que no ven, corazón que no siente. So eyes that don't see, heart that can't feel. So you can't feel your brother's pain if you're not experiencing it yourself, right? And so one thing I think about parties, political parties, either one, there has been an assumption about Latinos care about immigration, which I don't know that it's a full analysis. Like it's just an assumption. Did you actually go talk to Latinos of first, second, third generation? Because they all have a very different experience of America. But the experience I would bet if I had money that we have a similar experience about how we experience America as Latinos in the racism that we experience. And so I think for some Latinos, it may be this assumption that their proximity to whiteness is going to keep them safe and protected when we know it's not true. I know that in 2014, between 2014 and 2015, one of our sister organizations in, I believe it was New Mexico, was fighting the deportation of a U.S. citizen Latina woman. And we were fighting that case nationally, right? But she was a U.S. citizen. I think the lack of historical knowledge of what this country has done to Latinos, in particular Mexican Americans and Californians, and how it wasn't that long ago that this country deported U.S. citizen Mexicans throughout California, and that this country still can revoke your citizenship if you became a naturalized citizen. I mean, I think it's just like a complex piece of it. And at the end of the day, a common thread, I think, is this inability to know our history, our inability to actually understand that our casting your vote, you may be doing it as an individual, but it's actually a collective act of love. And the other piece of it is, I can't help to think about the impact, long historical impact in our bodies and our families of our own biases and racism, right? Like we come from countries that were like taken over, right? And colonized. So in those, like if I think of my own family, right? They may not remember the Spanish conquest, but they sure know that when my twins were born, they're like, oh, look, twin A is lighter skinned than twin B.
Yeah, I was explaining that to Bob. There's a lot of colorism. And that makes, that creates such tension, power tensions within Latin America in general.
Yep.
So, and you already see that as your kids are born and this one's darker and this one's lighter. So what? But the colorism always gives priority to the lighter skin over the darker skin.
Yeah. And so you will always hear Latinos want to connect to this, like, I had this grandmother that had color, blue, green eyes, right? As if it was like the most, the highest level of where your lineage comes from. So I kind of question, well, how are all these pieces kind of put together? And then one of my colleagues who's an organizer in Oakland shared last week as we were processing the election, and she is a dreamer. So she doesn't have permanent status in this country. Young woman, graduate from UC Davis, and said, I don't understand how my family voted for a person that has publicly spoken about deporting me. And so Latinos are going to be facing that, like, but it's because of the economy. It's not because of you. Like, don't take it personal. That's not going to happen to you. You went to college, right? You're a dreamer. And so somehow, I think that's part of why the quote about, is this the darkness of giving birth to something new, that we are being asked to see the humanity in each other above any politics, right? And we are going to be forced to do that. In that, I think it is Democrats in this case are going to have to really reckon with, have you actually listened to the communities that you call your constituents? Because it is wrong to blame Latinos, Latino men. I think there's a conversation to have with Latino men for sure. I'm still trying to understand you all.
I kind of talked a little bit about that in the last episode, and I think that that's something that we can talk about, more of a conversation, because of how Latino men in particular, but even the immigrants, even immigrant men. I mean, we're dealing with this feel of separation. Like, oh, now that I am, naturalized, or I'm a citizen, and we were taught by this culture in the US to look down on immigrants, especially immigrants of color. Yeah. And so the culturalization that happened when I was growing up was to separate myself from those Spanish speakers because they are less than. But where did all those ideas come from? That's the whole point.
It's, can I share something really personal? So I have twin boys. They're 6 years old. They're the biggest blessing God has given me. I thank God for them every day. Recently, my son, Joaquin, my husband is also bilingual, like me, fully bilingual. And when they were born, we taught in Spanish. And then when my son, one of my twins, Julian, he's on the spectrum, and so he needed speech therapy. And it was really hard to find a Spanish-speaking speech therapist during the pandemic. So he got an English one. He learned, so he's on the spectrum, so he just learned Spanish much faster, English, much faster. And Joaquin, who was more fluent, then he started pre-K and kindergarten, and then he just refused to speak Spanish. So recently this summer, I was talking to him and I said, we're driving to school, and I say, oh, you're Mexican, you're Mexican-American. And he says, no, I'm American. And I mean, my heart dropped, because I'm like, I have so much pride on just who I am and being an American, of course, that's really important to me. But I also come from somewhere. I know where I come from. Right. And I said, no, mijo, you're Mexican-American. And he's like, no, I'm not. I don't speak Spanish. And so
that's the thing. The language part is a big one too. So yeah.
And so when you think about when countries are taken over, the biggest piece is around assimilation.
Yep.
Right. And so I've never taught this to my child. He's 6 years old, but I'm able to identify right now that somewhere in society he learned, you don't speak Spanish, so therefore you are not part of this community.
That's right.
And as a Latina woman I came to this country when I was 10 years old. When I go back to Mexico, I don't speak, even though I'm fluent, I think I'm fluent, but more than you, they're like, you are not fluent, right? So you become this hybrid of.
Yeah, you get stuck in the middle. It's a subculture. Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder how much of that is too for like the way that Latinos that are second, third generation, Latinos that are mixed, we just all have a very different experience of America.
Like when I go to Mexico, I've traveled a lot, for many reasons, but they usually tell me, they're like, you bring your Spanglish with you. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I don't think anything that I've told you is Spanglish, but I understand what they're saying. Mm-hmm. It's the fact that I'm not using the exact correct words, or the lingo that's there. I'm using technical, grammar. But the whole point, though, is, and at times I'll be guilty of using Spanglish, but I don't care. That's just the way I was raised. Yeah. But they feel the whole, like the whole culture of when you come into, going into their context. and they listen to you talk and everything, and they're like, first of all, when I hear your accent, because I speak fluently too, but when I hear your accent, I think that you're Mexican, from here. He's like, but the moment I spend at least a couple of minutes with you, you're not from here. You're Spanglish. That's what they tell me. You're Spanglish.
Yeah, and I appreciate what you're saying, because it's a racial distortion to think that all Latinos think alike.
Right.
With any people group, it's a distortion.
Right.
And so it's easy in an election where they're saying that, we misrepresented or misunderstood the potential Latino vote or any other group that way.
Because it's not a monolith.
No, there's not any one reason that it shifted a little bit from expectations. And so it makes it far more difficult to answer the why question.
Yeah. But it does make it easier to identify there's a conversation.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like that it's like, not just with Latinos, but it's like, we are a human race.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, but the moment that we feel judged, right? Like in this case, like, you don't speak Spanish in the way, like you're never going. So how do we create spaces of belonging?
It's great.
Absolutely.
Right? Because
it's great.
That's why the invitation of listen to your loved ones, be curious, and it's going to be hard, but giving birth is not easy. I mean, as a woman, let me tell you, it's not easy. And so it's like tending to your own spirit, whatever that looks like, right? You're going to see your uncle that's going to make jokes about la la la, or my brother who I'm going to see on Friday, and he's coming from Texas. And I'm going to sit there, and my initial reaction is going to be to say, you are wrong. But I can't point the finger, because I got to point it as, what is God calling me in this moment to say, I'm going to have to be part of the solution, but I can't just see the humanity in the people I don't know, but I'm going to have to see the humanity in the people I love and know how much I love organizing. And that's going to be a hard one for me. It really is. Man, so pray for me.
You are preaching right now. And Nate's going to have to highlight that part right there. Because those are the questions that we're asking. And one of the things that we talked about in the last episode, because you had that same question. And I said, one of the things that I believe appeal to, and I'm not going on statistics or anything, because it's just the elections barely happened, right? And all the numbers are starting to come out. But one of the things that I think appeal to many immigrants in particular, or many Latinos in particular, males, but was the fact that the immigration issue was even, I believe, one of the main things. That it wasn't just the economy, because that was one of the things, but the immigration was huge. And who would have thought that what would have appealed to Latino voters even so much more would be the immigration issue than just the economy. And I hear that over and over. It's not just the economy. It is the immigration issue. And it's almost like this feel of, and I have encountered that with undocumenteds that have become, naturalized and, even citizens, that there is a feeling that they get of superiority, and now say that, well, you're going to have to, if you're not going to do how I did, then you don't belong here. And I'm like, where is the grace? Like you're saying, where is looking at people with, the image of God in them and really, really dignifying people? Somebody did that to you, coming in, or to your mother, or I had an immigrant mother, and I remember how she was treated. And I could never forget those things. Yet it was happening to me. I started treating immigrants in the same manner. And I'm like, what is going on here? Yeah. Something's wrong with this. I even, did my best to come back, and I was real pocho, those that don't speak well Spanish. I went to school. I took years of Spanish, really dove into the culture so that I could learn it really well, because for me, it was that important. I know not everybody could do that, but it was that important. Like you're saying, how can I begin those conversations? How can I step into their shoes? For me, it was transforming. For me, it was a big part of my deconstruction, because when I started seeing the image of God in the marginalized groups, in essence, what we're talking about right now, the immigration or the immigrants, Latino immigrants and specifically, it began to transform me. It was like my saving grace. It was what opened my eyes to see many things. And it was what also helped me to begin to see how you were saying that assimilation, the culturalization that was happening in my life was actually, to a certain point, not helping me. because it was disconnecting me from others, in particular those that look like me, those that talk like me and grew up in that language. It's something. It's powerful. It's a powerful draw. Like you're saying, it's not going to be easy, but these are the conversations that we have to begin to have, or we have to do. We have to begin to have for there to be a rebirth in all of this. And I do believe that there is an opportunity. I do that. Last time I couldn't see that I was so angry. Yeah. I couldn't see anything.
Well, and I love that quote that maybe the darkness isn't the darkness of the tomb, but maybe the darkness of the womb.
It's great.
I recognized before the election that our country was in a tough spot, a very tough spot. The division and the separation, the partisan divide was so pronounced and so extreme that how is this going to change? It was almost beyond a human effort so in some ways the sense was that maybe it needs to get a little darker before the new thing shows up. And so I love that idea. It's a quote of hope in the midst of considerable confusion for those that were hoping we were on a much more progressive move toward more enlightenment. So I want to ask you a question because, and you may want to comment on something that Alex has said, but I did want to ask.
But real quick, I just want to say this. The ultimate Christian narrative is death and resurrection.
Absolutely.
So what we look at as a tomb, the next step is resurrection.
Right. And maybe something needed to happen to create, to push on this new birth in a much more dramatic fashion. But that doesn't say much about how hard this next period of darkness might be. And so I did want to ask you, what do we need to prepare for? What do we need to do, Gabby, SAC ACT leader? How can we participate and be ready to participate in the suffering that could be coming in preparation for that new birth? Yes, but how? What might it call to us? How might it call to us?
Our friend Rula was preaching yesterday at another church, and she said something that was really powerful. She said, "Hope is something you do."
Yeah.
It's not even about optimism. It's just something you do. It's not something you feel. It's something you do.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh my God, that's such a good question. And just to add to what you're saying is like, I feel like in the US, we think about like, first you get motivation, then so you get motivation and then you're going to work out and then you'll get your results, right? So motivation is, I'm going to go to the gym, or you got the motivation, I'm going to the gym and then I'm going to see my perfect body, right? Which is actually a little crazy to think. I mean, some people may work that way. But in reality, I think the role that the faith community has right now is that we don't need motivation because people may have different reasons that may be motivated. Maybe anger, it may be love, it may be curiosity, but we need to move into action because it's through action and getting to know each other that we will get the motivation and the courage to step into the lines that we're going to be probably dragged into. And then we'll see the results. And I'm hoping the results will be that of collective love and creating the kind of community that our families deserve. But it's not this blind hope, because we got to be super clear. There are really hard times coming. Just give a sense of, I'm not messaging. I was trying to find some of the statistics of just within 24 hours, the day after the election. Folks probably already seen this, but we know that Elon Musk made $15 billion within 24 hours of the election.
It's crazy.
Like, wow, this man was not going to spend his money in his lifetime.
Absolutely.
Right? Mm-hmm. And the fact that we should be attentive to someone with that much disposable capital, the dangers that it could have, right, around power. Two, when we talk about deportation, the reason why a lot of conversations are focusing on immigrants, even though we know LGBTQ plus folks, right? Like all the different rights, you name them, are going to be incarceration rates. All of these things we know are going to be impacted because they have been outlined. Even education. I mean, in that Project 2025, it talks about being able to like defund Title I schools. There is big things coming, but deportations, the reason why immigrants are a big top of the list, one, I imagine is probably the easiest because hate has already been distributed. And so people are like,
right,
send them back, right?
And they'll be turning them over too.
Yeah, but then within 24 hours of the election, stocks for detention and deportation spaces, so the jails and the deportation cells went up. So there's two big groups that run those private prisons. The GEO group, their stocks went up 42%. And the Core Civic, their stocks went up 29%. So if people are thinking that maybe this is not going to happen, it's kind of curious to me, if you follow the money, that these stocks within 24 hours went up, right? So people are going to make money. And I think that the other part we need to do and prepare is that folks are going to benefit from it, benefit from the pain in our communities. And so there's an opportunity for people to do. You can bear witness, right? And for some people, it may be like, that's not enough, but some people may be there in their journey of leadership. And that's totally okay. Mm-hmm. To say, no, actually, that is wrong. What I just witnessed is wrong. You should not treat this waitress in this way. To be able to have that courage to speak in that moment and help someone feel seen is going to be imperative. Because I think as a society, we're going to see more of that. So those tiny acts of, hey, what that person said to you is not okay. It may feel out of place, right? Like I'm butting into somebody else's business, but you may hope that day that person feels seen. And so that will matter. And then there's like can we think together about what we can do, right? Like how do we, in California, just to think about California passed a proposition that's going to defund mental health. Mm-hmm. So we're going to have to figure out not just what the federal government is doing, but like, how are we going to provide mental health services for people at the local level? And pushing local governments. Also, like we need to be talking to the sheriff, the local DA, the local elected officials, asking them, how are you preparing for mass deportations? Mm-hmm. Because they are our elected officials, and maybe they don't have the solutions, but this is a conversation that they should be preparing for, right? How is the school district in Sacramento and in San Juan and in your local communities preparing to protect families when they're dropping off their children for school?
I remember the last time around when we met with the sheriff here locally and kind of putting a fire underneath them. And I thought that was very, very significant as a clergy leader to be able to use the influence that you have with an elected official and be able to put that pressure, because you can. It wasn't a very pleasant meeting, but
it was not a pleasant meeting at all. But I think part of it is like, this is part of leaning into, they may not know.
People don't understand even what an undocumented worker is. People don't, it's not explained. So I was doing some research and found that taxes paid by undocumented workers total in this country around $10 billion. Mm-hmm. Nobody even talks about contribution made by workers.
Well, there's the average person doesn't even know that.
No, but doesn't know that. They don't know that.
Immigrants, undocumented immigrants don't pay taxes.
They think all the negative things that people have said about undocumented workers, they just sort of believe, well, that's just fact. But they don't have an understanding. So what you're saying is it's possible that just trying to, wherever you can, bring some kind of message of truth and accuracy to the picture is part of helping. But it seems like so little in a time where the problem is going to get so big so quickly.
Yeah.
And it's frightening.
It is. And then there's a direct, like, how do we protect families in the media? Because like there's different sectors that are going to have to move pieces, right? So we need commitment from the local sheriff's department to say we are not going to allow ICE in our jail.
Right.
Like there needs to be a public commitment to that, right? So we need to have that conversation with them. We need a conversation with the school districts to say, hey, when families are putting people, like dropping off kids, you need to let them know, like they play a really unique role because they could also distribute information about people's rights. Right. And then there's like the other direct piece, which is we need to make sure that as many people in the community know their rights and they know who to call. Right. And so that's one piece. We need folks that are U.S. residents that are eligible to become citizens to start submitting their applications, because guess what? You have a voice and you could be voting. And then I think we could also be, and there's people, well, I don't know how to do any of those things, and show up to meetings. If you want to stay informed and be like, just tell me when to show up, like sign up to the SAC ACT website and we'll send you a newsletter so that you can know when to get involved.
Yeah, we used to do a lot of hosting conversations for Know Your Rights. I thought that was very, very strategic. Yeah. That's something that I know helped. Because a lot of people, they didn't know, like, what do we do, or even people that were citizens, that are citizens that have, that either they know people that are undocumented. What are the rights? Yeah. So
how would they identify someone undocumented? Is that easy to do? No. I mean, can they walk up to anybody? Gabby, can they hear you speaking somewhere and say, well, this person obviously has an accent, so we should go ask her if she's a documented resident? And if they did that, is that legal for them to do? Is that okay? They
could ask, but I think this is part of the knowledge of the community, right? Is that like the person doesn't have to answer, and most people don't know that. The average,
they don't know that
because because it's like, oh well, this is an authority figure, and I need to respond. But they could just ask you, and they can just racially profile you and say, hey, I mean, it still happens now,
Why'd they come
right?
to Alex's church? Of course they racial profile.
Most definitely.
And so I think that's part of why like the education and know your rights is going to be key. And we have an infrastructure. We've done that before. We have prepared and have an infrastructure for preparing congregations and spaces of worship to be sanctuary places.
Yeah, I was going to ask that question.
You don't want to have, that's like your last resort.
Right.
Right? Because families don't want to go into a sanctuary. They need to work. They need to pay their mortgage. They need to pay their bills. But there's like, we have those infrastructures that we put in place. So we need to execute them right now. And that's where they're in the process. That's a place that we're in right now.
And I was going to ask that question, like, how would people be able to know, because you really don't want the word to be all out there, but how can they know that there are places, and which places are they that they can go to if it gets that far?
Yeah, so those are part of the conversations between obviously the community that's directly impacted. And we as an organization in 2016, when we prepared to do Sanctuary, we never publicly released the congregation that signed up to be a sanctuary intentionally, because obviously we don't want people that may have a different point of view to come and have that. So that remains very much confidential. But folks that are like, hey, I want to accompany families to bear witness during their court hearing, just the presence, just being there sitting next to a person that's going to court, not only helps that person feel like they're not alone, like somebody will know if I don't go home tonight. Like that might mean something to someone. And then it allows us to also like ignite a network of relationships that we have. People can also donate, of course. That's like the least thing they can do is like, I always tell folks, like, if you just give $25 to help us prepare for 2025, like we are going to ignite these different pieces, and we're going to walk with families. And then a big piece that I hope congregations do is to have like what we call listening conversations internally in the congregation, because there will be people that maybe voted for the new elected president, but that doesn't want to see the harm in the community, and there is a space for them too, right? And maybe it's just like my good old Catholic girl ways, but then like I believe in there could be repentance, and there is still a place at the table for you, because the country has spoken. There's a new president, and we are going to honor that because we believe in the democratic process. And for the next 4 years or however many time, we are going to continue to organize families and empower them to use their voice to identify problems and solutions, because they know what they need, right? They're going to tell us, this is how you can protect me in this moment, by going to court with me, or by housing my family in your sanctuary, right? But that congregation's having that conversation internally, and you don't have to do it alone, right? Like we have structures in which we can guide those conversations. It's going to be really important, because the last thing that we can do or should do, I think, is have folks that have a different political view than us feel like they can never, right, repent or never be part of the solution, and because we're going to need them, and we're going to need people that just stood in the sidelines. This is not a spectator sport. That's not where we are now.
Right.
Now we are in the doing, and we've been here before, and we could do it again, and we could do it better, actually.
Yeah.
We really can do it better, because people have an expectation that their families deserve more.
It's interesting because when you're just saying that we can do it better, we've done this before. I was thinking when you were going down the list of all the things that we need to do, I was like, oh no, here we go again. Because I remember the last time. And, we went as far as helping people out. I know not everybody could do this, but as far as helping people out in the border and even across, we were helping shelters to be able to be much more organized and connected and better resourced. So I don't know that situation if I'm going to be able to get involved in that again, but I know here locally we have a lot of work to do. Yeah. But our time is pretty much up. We are going to have to do a part 2 with you. Yeah. So we're committing you right now.
And I just want to thank you, Gabby, for coming on and talking about something that is obviously very fresh and very much at the beginning stages, because 2.5 weeks ago, there were many of us who thought that we were going to be in a different place right now, and that we were going to have different kinds of podcasts going on here. But here we are now with our reality. And to be honest with you, I think many of us who see what is coming feel like it is a step back into the past, and even worse. And so it's really hard to feel hopeful, and hard to feel like we feel like a new mountain was created that we are being asked to climb. And it is, the odd part about it, it feels like that for our society and for our culture and for our world. And it's a very frightening sort of time. So your leadership, the leadership of the organization that you help lead, we need your voice. We need your help, your guidance. Maybe you always have felt up to now you're having to clamor for someone to listen or whatever else. I don't think it's that way anymore. I think that you should feel tremendous freedom to use your expertise and your organization's history and community to help us who are still in a confused state to figure out how can we do this. And so I'm just sort of saying, please speak up as you do. Please encourage your organization to become much more bold with your ideas and your encouragements, because I think there's a lot of people really hungry for how do we prepare for what might be coming? I don't know if I said that very well,
Thank
but
you. That really means a lot to me.
No, actually, that goes perfectly into what I wanted to ask you, because locally we're talking about, Sacramento and our region. But for people that are listening, because we have people listening across the nation and even beyond, but especially across the nation, where can they go to find these resources that you're talking about? Like they say, okay, yeah, but Gabby, you're in Sacramento, I'm in New York, or I'm in LA or wherever.
Yeah.
Where can I go to do exactly what you're saying? Where does it start for me? Because I want to get involved. That was my question originally. I don't want to do this alone. Who's doing already work? And I just want to join that work.
Yeah, so they could, if you want to find like the local chapter in California, you can go to PICO, California, PICO.org. And if you live outside of California, you could look at Faith in Action. So faithinaction.org. And then you will see a list of the different states. And you could just contact that organization and email them. You can also contact us directly through you and say, hey, I'm in DC and I want to get involved, or I'm in New Mexico, and I can do a very handoff to an actual person that can call you, because there are very many people that are doing this work. It's just really for you to do some discernment around where is God calling you in this moment, because there's a role for everybody. If all you want to do is, I want to be the person that brings coffee to every meeting, you know what? We need that person too. It really is. Thank you both for having me.
Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, and we want to invite you to, when you have, when things are happening and you need to get the word out, or you need some sort of other platforms to sort of help, please give us a call, because we know what's coming. We recognize that these things are going to happen, and we're going to have to be able to help organize people to take action. And so it fits with what you think about on a daily basis for your life and for your work. So please see this as an open invitation to come and keep us filled in. Yeah.
Yeah. And, Bob and I, we've been having this conversation. Is like, okay, what are going to be our next steps? We have to really talk about that. And I was like, well, it's great to have Gabby. She's going to give us a lot of steps here. Right. And I think that's what we got in this episode. So thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Gabby, once again for being with us. It was fantastic. And we got to do a part 2 and talk a little bit more about, Latino vote and what happened there. That's another conversation, like you were saying.
Get your cousin.
Right. Yeah, pull your Texans. I'm sorry, your Texan family.
I know. I'm about to see him Friday. I'm going to figure it out. Pray for me.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you all. Yes, thank you so much, Gabby and Bob. I don't know if you have any last words.
No, I think that's good. I see that this is it's a much bigger hill to climb than for any one person. So this is going to be sort of an ongoing, progressive sort of conversation for us all. Yeah,
stay tuned for the next episode. I'm sure we are going to be talking more about this, but it's good. It's good for us. We got to take action. This is a good time for that. So thank you all for tuning in. Until next time, take care.